Okay, good evening and welcome. I call to order this regular meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It is February 12th and the time is
5:26.
5:27. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Board Member Kravitz, will you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will have a roll call starting from my far right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz.
Barbara Perleberg.
Allison Beckham.
Patty Beckman. All board members are present and we do have a quorum. We move to agenda item 3, approval of the agenda. Are there any requests to approve or amend the agenda? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Board Member Perleberg makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz makes the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. We now move to agenda item 4, students and staff recognitions. We ask Dr. Creekard to please present the student and staff recognitions and celebrations.
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. We have 3 celebrations to share this afternoon, and I would like to introduce Dr. Melissa Sakos, our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, to give us all 3 of these honors. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Creekard and Sandra. I am pleased to share these celebrations with our students and staff this evening. The first is a group of 8th grade students from Copper Ridge School. Would Paul Hadavi, Lars
Nordhagen, Caitlin Boffman join me, as well as their 8th grade teacher, Jennifer Munoz, Linda Bepley, and Principal Lindsay Stoller-Slover.
Hey, thank you. Congratulations.
Paul, Lars, Caitlin, and their classmate, Pierce Rainwater, who could not be with us this evening, took part February 2nd in the annual Carol Edwards Excellence in Mathematics Junior High competition at Chandler Gilbert Community College. The goal of this was fun, an annual event, now in its 19th year, to motivate today's youth to be successful in mathematics and encourage kids to be proud of their inner nerdiness, if you will. I asked if I could say that word earlier, and they said sure. In between the seriousness of the competition, middle school students from Arizona public, charter, and private schools have fun applying their math skills to such activities as mission projectile, airplane toss, and geometry and nature, to name a few. During the serious parts of the day, Caitlin took a 40-question, 90-minute multiple choice test that is used to assess international students' math abilities. Meanwhile, the boys worked on a team project, completing parts of the program for international student assessment. Without giving too much information away, it was pretty engaging format. For example, they had to estimate the area of Antarctica, read diagrams to estimate a driver's reaction and stopping time, and read graphs to estimate heights. Wow. I am pleased to report that these Copper Ridge students did very well. Caitlin tied for second place in the individual competition, and Paul, Lars, and Pierce nabbed first place. I know it's awkward. Now you get to show off to the audience here. These students and their many friends and 7th grade counterparts have been meeting weekly since the beginning of the school year to prepare for the competition. So huge congratulations goes to not only the students for working so hard for over 6 months, but also to their teachers, Jennifer Munoz and Linda Bepley, for their mentorship of these math whizzes. Congratulations, Copper Ridge.
Wow, that was impressive.
Sorry about that. I got overwhelmed by everything they had to do for that competition. All right. Next, I would like to call up Ingleside Middle School 8th grade student Mackenzie, her 8th grade English language arts teacher Wes Wagner, and Ingleside principal Dr. Chris Thuman. I'm going to hand this to you so we don't forget that again. Got it. All right. Every year, Arizona State University celebrates the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Part of that celebration is an essay and poster contest for elementary, middle, and high school students. In recent years, Ingleside Middle School has stamped itself as a consistent contributor to this competition, and I'm happy to report a consistent performer. Students were asked to write about an individual or situation that demonstrates leadership through service, which is something Dr. King believes strongly in. Last month, Mackenzie received first place recognition for her essay. Mackenzie has agreed to read her essay about an amazing member of her family. Mackenzie?
When I think of a leader, I think of someone who is generous, caring, humble, inspired, driven, and courageous. All of these words define my Aunt Judy. My aunt not only is a leader, but she is an inspiration. When I grow up, I would be honored to be like her. My aunt formed an organization for kids with childhood cancer. As you can imagine, it is miserable for a kid to have to experience cancer. Through tests, procedures, chemotherapy, and radiation, the last thing a kid wants is to lose their hair. My Aunt Judy felt the least she could do was knit beanies for kids who have sadly lost their hair. Although it is not fun losing your hair, at least you can be stylish while doing so. She has knit over 700 beanies and counting, making sure that each one has the softest yarn she can find. My aunt, as well as Martin Luther King Jr., think about people in need and not just about themselves. They worry about people and try to make certain situations better for others. They both sacrificed what they had to help make life better. My aunt is following in Martin Luther King Jr.'s footsteps, and I hope someday I will too. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The time is always right to do what is right," and my aunt definitely believes this.
Thank you, Mackenzie. That is certainly something to aspire to. Congratulations. You're welcome. Lastly, I would like to invite up Desert Mountain High School Band Director Michelle Irvin and Principal Dr. Lisa Hirsch to join me. How are you? I'm good. Mrs. Irvin is a recent recipient of another ASU award, but is being celebrated today for, among other things, being brave enough to take 90 high school students to London over winter break. Yeah. Dr. Hirsch? Dr. Hirsch is going to tell us more.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President, Board, and Dr. Creekard and Sandra. Oh, wow. Michelle Irvin has received the ASU School of Music Outstanding Mentor Teacher Award for 2019. We celebrate this accomplishment tonight as a district in front of this school board and superintendent because it is the ultimate gift. When a teacher, a master teacher, is recognized for teaching future teachers by such an institution such as ASU's Mary Lou Fulton School of Education, we know that we have genius in our presence. This is a woman who has been with Desert Mountain for the life of the school. I recently learned that she had been just the marching band and band teacher when the strings teacher left, and there were only a handful of strings players. At this point, in 2019, our marching band has over 100 players, and our actual string students number 70, and we have 80 signed up for next year. Her jazz band is unbelievable. There are 2 of them. And the hours she spends practicing, performing, and competing surpasses most humans' capacity. She spent her winter break taking the marching band and orchestra to London, and this is her second invite since the school's inception. This is an invite that most marching bands crave to just get once. I also want to mention the Tri-M Club, which is a national service club. Our students from choir, band, theater, and orchestra apply to this honor society and dance, and then perform services like playing music for the homeless or for veterans. And our very own Tri-M has been recognized as runner-up by the National Association for Music Education this past summer. We were second place in the national competition, which is incredible. And it's only a couple years old, right?
Yeah, 4 years old.
Yeah, 4 years old at Desert Mountain, so whoosh, right to the top. Michelle is a legend, and to wrap up this evening's honors, I've chosen to read a quote by Margaret Wheatley, who has written about leadership and quantum physics. So she makes an analogy that actually is Michelle Irvin. And the funny thing is she was texting me from the parade while I was trying to write something, and I actually shared this with her before. So I said, as leaders, we play a crucial role in selecting the melody, setting the tempo, and establishing the key, and inviting the players. But that's all we can do. The music comes from something we can't direct, from a unified whole created among the players, a rational holism that transcends separatism. In the end, when it works, we sit back amazed and grateful. Thank you.
Congratulations, Michelle. Michelle certainly taught me everything I needed to know as a very young assistant principal at Desert Mountain a few years ago, just a couple years ago. So thank you for letting us share these celebrations tonight. Thank you.
Okay, we now call on Dr. Creekard for agenda item 5, the superintendent's comments.
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. You may have heard a news story this week concerning a local high school student, not an SUSD student, who was arrested for allegedly selling counterfeit prescription narcotics containing the opioid fentanyl. This 16-year-old student was arrested after a schoolmate came perilously close to dying after having taken one of these pills. Thankfully, he will recover. Opioids are a major problem in our society and right here in Scottsdale, too, I'm sorry to say. Parents of middle school and high school students, I strongly encourage you to speak again to your children about the dangers of taking illegal drugs and prescription drugs not prescribed for them. Make sure your children know what to do if someone tries to sell them or give them a suspicious substance of any kind. Tell a parent, tell a teacher, tell a school administrator. Submit an anonymous silent witness report online. Be brave and do something before someone else gets hurt. We are grateful to our police partners and the community organizations with which we work to increase awareness about substance abuse. Our support service office is available too to help with additional resources, counseling, and support for students and families for whatever they need. On a happier note, the new Hopi Elementary School was formally dedicated last week in a wonderful, albeit windy and cold, celebration. I was very pleased to attend the dedication ceremony, as I'm sure President Beckman and governing board members Kravitz, Beckham, and Greenberg were as well. It was wonderful to see the happy faces of the students and teachers who are settling into their new school home. Many thanks need to go to parents, neighbors, staff, Principal Tamara Jagodzinski, all of whom made that day possible. Next up is the ribbon cutting at Pima Traditional School the day after tomorrow, which coincidentally is Valentine's Day and Arizona Statehood Day. That Pima will share its formal dedication with such auspicious observances is only fitting for a community that loves its school and has done so for a very long time, 60 years. Work continues on translating the collaborative wishes of the Cherokee Elementary School community with their project architects. We are excited to see some options from them in the coming months. It will be the governing board's job to decide which way to go, rebuild, renovate, or some combination of the two, but there will be more information coming in the next couple of months at board meetings. As for our other project underway, Navajo Elementary School, the work to return students and staff to the Granite Reef campus next school year continues. In fact, the board has a recommendation before it tonight to authorize some additional restoration work beyond what the insurance company will pay for. Coming up next month, our 15 elementary schools and 4 of our 5 K-8 schools will host their formal kindergarten roundup events. SUSD offers full-day kindergarten at 19 schools, and we encourage parents to visit our kindergarten classes during the week of March 4th. This past weekend, our school district had 20 entries in the annual Parada del Sol, including all 5 high school marching bands, Desert Canyon Elementary's kindergarten and first grade Mandarin students, Navajo Elementary's STEAM program featuring their handmade steam engine in the parade, Saguaro High School's 6-time consecutive state championship football team, and even marching band comprised of former Scottsdale High School students. Some of the very best parts about SUSD were on full display, and I could not be more proud. I'd like to give a special shout out to board member Kravitz and Kokopah principal Nick Noonan, who walked the entire 2-mile route, handing out SUSD marketing materials. Thank you both. Lastly, I have some athletic news to share. Winter sports, soccer and basketball, are winding down with playoff matches this week. SUSD has 3 girls soccer teams in contention for a state title in their respective AIA divisions. 2 boys soccer teams are in postseason play, including Coronado, who will play in the state semifinal that gets underway at 7 p.m. tonight. 3 girls basketball teams start their state title quest tomorrow night, and 4 out of our 5 boys high school basketball teams will take the court this week, including Arcadia and Saguaro tonight. So good luck to all of those teams. And all of this is occurring at the same time as spring sports, baseball, softball, tennis, track and field, and beach volleyball are getting underway. It's a busy time for our high school athletes. 2 weekends ago, 540 middle school athletes on 35 teams took part in the district's Winter Athletic Festival at Desert Mountain High School and Mountainside Middle School. It was a beautiful day, and no one got hurt. Lastly, I would like to tell you about 2 outstanding coaches, recognition given to them. Chaparral swim and dive coach Richard Krasnowski and Chaparral girls soccer coach Robin Carlson. Richard and Robin have been named the 2018 Sectional Coaches of the Year in their respective sports by the National Federation of State High School Associations. Our section covers the states of Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, and Utah. You saw the result of Richard's work when the Chaparral boys and girls swim and dive team came before this board a few months ago to celebrate their state championship. And Robin is still out on the soccer field with her #1 ranked girls soccer team that sees the state quarterfinal action tomorrow night in the 5A conference. But more important than any accolades these coaches' teams bring to their school is the leadership and inspiration they impart along the way to their teams. Some of their students may continue in their sport in college. For others, this might be it. However, what they all have in common, and they most likely do not realize it yet, is the huge positive influence that these coaches have made on their lives that will be there forever beyond the wins, the losses, and the state championships. Lessons learned on a sports team are life lessons. SUSD is indeed fortunate to have people of Coach Carlson and Coach Krasnowski's caliber leading our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Creekard. We are now moving on to agenda item 6, information and discussion items with an update on the Caros Health Arizona Annual Report for the benefit insurance plans.
Mr. Gadd, would you like to introduce our guest, please?
Sure can. Thank you. Good evening, Madam President and fellow board members, Dr. Kreikert and Ms. Como. We appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today on an update on the overall plan performance of Scottsdale Unified School District. With me today, I have Jeremy Larson, who's our senior accountant. He's going to provide a financial overview. And then I also have John Ashton, our executive director of Caros Health Arizona. So with that said, I wanted to briefly touch on, we do want to cover again financial update on the plan. We also want to cover a claims review from a utilization perspective on what we're seeing within the data. And then we also want to provide some preliminary information with respect to renewal and strategy for 2019-2020. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Jeremy to give the financial overview, and then I'll be back in a moment.
Thank you, Tanya. Good evening, Madam President and board members. So I'm going to go over the financial summary for the 17-18 fiscal year. If we can change the slide to the next one. Thank you. Okay, so this is for the financial summary for the 17-18 year. So that's for the fiscal year. So that represents July 2017 through June 2018. If you look at the middle chart, you'll see a couple key indicators. These are important things that I think show the financial health of how Scottsdale doing with Kairos. You'll see gross contributions. That represents the amount that has been invoiced, or another way you could say it is the premiums that have been charged. You have net loss expense below that, which is the medical and dental claims expense. It includes IBNR and then also stop loss recoveries. Below that, you see the excess of revenues over/under expenses from operations. Another way you can put that is a net income or deficit. Account balance, end of period. This represents the amount of money you hold within the end of the period, so within your account for Kairos. If you look to the right, you'll see an actual column and then a budgeted column. If you look at the gross contributions, we come pretty close into line with what we have budgeted. And that's the same situation with the net loss expense. Unfortunately, we ended up with a deficit of $119,000. However, it's a significantly large plan. You have more than $14 million in premiums. That's less than 1% of what your premiums are. So we consider that close to break even. If you look below, you'll see a $3.8 million end of a period account balance. That represents the amount of money that you hold as of June 30, 2018. Okay, we'll keep moving down. You'll see some charts below. On the left, we have a medical and RX expense paid chart. And on the right, we have a dental expense paid chart. A couple things I wanted to point out is that July through September, we have pretty low claims, but that's because those claims are immature. You joined Kairos in the 17-18 fiscal year, and so when you join those first couple months, you're going to have immature claims. That's just because the claims have been incurred for those months, don't get paid until subsequent months. In addition, you'll see February, May, you see some high claimant months, and that's due to some high cost claimants, some shock claims, which Tanya will touch on later in our discussion, in our presentation. On the right, you'll see the dental expenses pay chart. One thing I want to point out that this is employee voluntary. So the teachers, members of the Scottsdale, the employees can choose to elect this plan. Any questions on the financial summary for the 17-18 fiscal year?
Board Member Beckham.
Yes, is it on? Is it on? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So you said that there was a deficit for the fiscal year for 2018. Can you explain why? Because it wasn't budgeted.
The deficit is due to, we estimated you to have a higher census count than what we thought it would be, the average census count. So in turn, we received less premiums, and so your revenue went down, but your expenses remained relatively flat, and so as a result, we had a slight deficit. Makes sense. So what the census count was for the budget was more than what this average census count ended up being. So the premiums are based on census count, if that makes sense.
So there wasn't anything extraordinary there
No.
that came out? It's just that you had some fixed costs?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just, there's nothing extraordinary that occurred. It's very closely in line with budget of the 73. There's only about a $193,000 variance between the two, which is relatively immaterial on the size of the plan. So we consider that close to break even.
And so the majority of the expenses, are they claims?
Yes.
Or
Yes, more than 90%
so were the
of
claims
your.
higher than you anticipated? So it's on the claim side, or is it on
So
fixed
the
expenses
claims
side?
are slightly below what we anticipated, but the revenue that we received is more below than what we anticipated. And so at the end of the day, we had a lower deficit because of that.
Thank
Make
you.
sense?
Can I
Board
offer,
Member
Yeah,
Greenberg.
yeah,
can I offer something in addition to that? You guys are self-insured for your medical benefits. So we estimate what the claims are going to be during the year. Those claims, if they're higher than we estimated, then you're going to have a deficit like you have here. Your fixed expenses were exactly what were budgeted. There was no fluctuation in the fixed expenses because we charge you a fixed fee for the expenses. So that's all due to medical expenses, and you'll see when you see what happens in here when Tanya gets into some of the specifics. We had several shock claims that I don't think anybody anticipates. When you see it, I think your eyeballs might go pretty big. It's all claims, all medical claims, and pharmacy, those two.
All right.
Okay.
yeah, that's going to represent most of your expense.
Board Member Greenberg.
Would it be easier for us to hear the full presentation and then do questions at the end?
They'll take questions now, or it's up to you.
I mean, just because if we're stopping and starting, especially because the shock claims do come, I'm just concerned that we might cover things that will answer some of those questions later on. So would that be easier if we did it that way? Or is it's up to you
That's
guys, I
fine with
guess.
us.
Yeah,
We're totally fine with that.
Is that
Waiting
fine?
until the end of the meeting, and that is a great point.
No,
There's-
you did. I apologize. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
did ask, but
okay.
it's,
Sorry about that. No.
It does work. We can wait till the end of the presentation because Tanya, my colleague, will answer a lot of the
Right.
questions probably that you will have.
Perfect.
If we turn to the 18-19 fiscal year, please. This is for the financial results for the first 5 months of the 18-19 fiscal year. So this represents July through November activity, July 2018 through November 2018. This is a similar format as what you saw before. The only difference is that you see the 2017 actual. This represents the first 5 months of 2017-18 fiscal year. So we have it side by side. You'll see gross contributions are closely in line with what we budgeted, the actual compared to what we budgeted. Net loss expense is a similar situation. We're very close. We have actually a surplus this year of $50,000 as of November. And I finished the financials for December, and this actually is now jumped up year to date to $248,000 surplus. So that's great news. Account balance end of period, we have about $1.44 million in our ending account balance, which is somewhat close in line with the 1.6 of what we budgeted. The two charts below are similar to the last one. The only difference is that you'll see the medical and RX expenses paid in orange. And so you can see it side by side of what expenses were month to month, how they occurred compared to last year. Okay. That's it from you, Tanya.
Great, thank you. I want to go ahead and spend some time now drilling into more of the claim performance that we see with respect to the plan. I think Jeremy covered the financials.
But what we did is we extracted out some key elements as it relates to the medical plan. One being some key highlights from a demographic perspective. Secondly, some key highlights with respect to utilization patterns that we see within the data. And then third, some kind of key financial highlights. I'll cover each of those today. One of the things that we do look at again is from a demographic perspective, that tells us a lot about what's going to happen potentially in a population. One of the things that you can see here is that your average member age is approximately 42 years of age. We do benchmark that with our insurance carrier, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona, who has several 100,000 members in the state, and they run at about 38 average years of age. And the reason that's important is because as we have an aging workforce, we obviously see more incidents of chronic illness, disease, prevalence, and things of that nature. You do have a high population of females, which we would expect obviously in the school districts. That's very consistent with what we see. About 36% members are childbearing age, so we see some incidents of maternity claims, which is very common. 82% of your employees elect employee-only coverage, and about 18% elect some form of dependent coverage, whether it be a spouse, child, or family. That's also very consistent with what we see just in our pool overall from a school district perspective. And then finally, of your 2,500 or so eligible employees, we see about 28% that have elected to either waive coverage or failed to enroll. And the reason that we tend to see that is, one, they might have access through a spouse's coverage, they might have access to the actual access, which is the state Medicaid plan, and things of that nature. Next, I'll cover the utilization metrics. And one of the things that I wanted to explain that I think is really important is from a health spectrum, you have basically on the left here, typically a portion of your population that's considered healthy or free of disease or illness. To the right of that, there's typically a segment of your population that is considered at risk or potential behaviors, lifestyles that could create the incidence of disease in the future. And then to the right of that, we also see then that there's a segment of the population that is in an early disease phase. Those might be individuals that have chronic conditions and so forth that have already been established. And then finally, at the very far end of the spectrum, we have the more active or severe disease states for individuals that have maybe more rare conditions or long-term chronic conditions. And the reason I point that out is because typically what we see is a lot of focus on the left-hand side in terms of wellness and health of the population for those existing that are already healthy, and then a lot of focus on the more severe disease states. And one of the things that we'll mention is that those catastrophic claims or those shock claims typically are the largest driver of your health plan. So with that said, a couple of things that I do want to point out within the population that we did see is about 8% of your members are currently experiencing some sort of musculoskeletal type of disorder. So those are typically knee conditions, hips, backs, and so forth. And a lot of emphasis and studies have looked at why is that the case, and what they're finding is there's a higher incidence of obesity, obviously, in the United States, and a lot of that drives some of those musculoskeletal types of conditions and services that are sought out. We do have some benchmark information on that, and typically in the Blue Cross population, they see about 8%, so you guys are pretty consistent with that. From a Kairos perspective, we looked at our book of business, and when we see that a little bit lower at about 6%, just from a comparative standpoint. And then the other important thing to point out is about 15% of your population is living with a chronic condition. So those are things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, asthma, and so forth. That we also have a benchmark, and that is within the Blue Cross population is approximately 10%, and within our Kairos population we see about 11%. So you guys are actually a little bit higher, and again, some of that attributable to the demographics of your population. The reason I bring that up, though, is it is important, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of focus on that full spectrum of how we're managing those costs overall from a medical management perspective. Next, I want to mention one of the other elements that the data showed us is that emergency room is always kind of a hot topic within health plans and performance. One of the things that we did see is that there's an opportunity for redirection in the emergency room about 28% of the time. So essentially that means 28% of the time people are using the emergency room for not the most appropriate reasons. Things like ear infections, sinus infections, sprains, strains, etc. And so the goal would be to try to redirect those individuals to a less intensive setting, whether it be a primary care physician, possibly a telehealth visit, or urgent care situation, which cost a lot more both from a plan perspective as well as a member perspective. And we'll talk a little bit about that here just in a moment. And then the final thing I'll mention, and I think that the healthcare industry kind of has lost sight over time over this, has to do with engagement of a primary care provider. We do see in your population about 60% of members have engaged with a primary care provider. And I think overall the industry can do better with respect to that because, again, once you've established with a primary care physician, they're going to help those individuals that are in those different phases of the spectrum manage any conditions that they have and kind of guide them through some of those processes in addition to other resources. And I want to pause and ask if there's any questions. So feel free to stop me. I'm moved into questions.
Do we have any questions? Not now.
Just a drink of water. Okay, so then next, I wanted to share some information. Again, these are more of the financial highlights that we saw within the data. So your allowed per member per month is approximately $525. And essentially what that tells us is on average, your members, every belly button in your plan is costing on average about $525. We do look at a benchmark on that as well, and it's risk adjusted to account for your demographic mix. And the benchmark on that is about $625. So actually a bit lower than we would typically see within a similar population. If you actually take out the high-cost claimants over $300,000, and the reason we do over $300,000 is you purchase stop-loss insurance. So basically, Scottsdale's on the hook for the first $300,000 of any individual claim, and then you have protection on any overage of that is reimbursed back to the plan. We did have 5 members who had shot claims in excess of $200,000. But again, when we extract out the over 300, your allowed per member per month is $441. So again, even a little bit better than that benchmark that I mentioned earlier. We did have one individual that was a very rare situation, very sad situation, that incurred approximately $1.6 million in claims expenses. That is very rare these days. It's a very significant amount. And essentially, it was a very rare condition that led to transplant. And then finally, on this particular slide, one thing that I do want to mention is, and this is probably the most staggering statistic that plans tend to see and go, oh my goodness, is that typically we see about 1.5% of claimants account for 40 to 50% of the overall spend. So going back to the health spectrum, we see over here about 80% of your population really driving 20% of the cost, and then the other 80% of the cost is driven by about 20% of the population. Okay. One of the things I wanted to just quickly remind the board of is we do currently, for the 18-19 plan year, have 3 plan options in place for your employees to choose from. This was a district decision. They currently have access to a PPO plan as well as 2 high deductible plans, so a $1,500 deductible. And I just wanted to include some quick stats on what these plan options look like, some key highlights of the benefits. And what you can see out of this is about a third enrollment within each of those respective plans. And then I also included for you a loss ratio. So a loss ratio is essentially calculating the premiums collected compared to the expenditures, right? So anything under 100 is good. Anything over 100 is not what you want to see. You're not collecting enough premium. It's very common that we see the PPO plans run a little bit higher in terms, from a loss ratio perspective. And then some of the high deductible plans, like you can see here on the 27, much, much lower than 100%. Questions on that? Pause again. Okay. Next, we've included some comparable data that the district asked us to pull together using various resources that we had from both a public records perspective as well as some entities that we interact with. And the goal here was to show you, from a contribution standpoint, what Scottsdale looks like compared to some other entities. You can see there in the middle, Scottsdale's kind of falling right in the middle of that grouping of larger districts in the valley. And you currently, last year, decided as part of the renewal process to do a fair and equitable contribution of $6,000 per employee, regardless of the plan that they elect or what their family size may be. You'll see on the very left-hand side within the high deductible plan, 900 of that 6,000 is actually not provided via premiums. Instead, it's provided as a health savings account contribution. Next, I'll touch on renewal projections. We have data through December right now, and what we're seeing within the industry, and based upon what the experts say, that the medical prescription trend projections for all employers is approximately 8%. So essentially, healthcare costs are going up 8% year over year. When we do the analysis of Scottsdale specific information, you guys are actually looking at a 6% cost increase overall for your plans. So slightly better performance than what we're seeing within the industry. We also then included some information. You do have two PPO dental plans that are self-funded as well, and so the claims expense is tied exactly to utilization, and we're projecting about 3% on the Premier plan and 7% on the Core plan. I can tell you in terms of the calculations, those are voluntary plans that employees elect into, and I think the 3% equates to less than $2 of premium, and the 7% about $3 or $4. And then the other thing I thought to mention is you do have various other ancillary lines of coverage that employees are allowed to purchase that include vision, life, disability, and all of those rates are guaranteed this next year with no change. Next, we did have an opportunity to meet with both the CFO, the benefits team, as well as the insurance committee to vet out ideas, enhancements, cost containment measures for the 2019-2020 plan year. Here's just a couple of things that they landed on. One of them is to look at enhancing the basic life insurance coverage to $50,000. Currently today for your certified and classified staff, you guys offer $25,000. That equates to about a $70,000 district addition if you were to offer that coverage. One of the strategies that we put in front of the committee was also to look at maybe a reduction in the telehealth copay. As a reminder, again, we're trying to steer individuals out of the emergency room and give them a little bit more option in terms of where to seek services for those acute illnesses. Today, the cost of a telehealth visit is $49 compared to an ER visit, which is $1,500, or even an urgent care visit, which is about $150 on average. And so our recommendation for the PPO plan, which has a copay tied to that, is to reduce that from the $49 down to a $0 copay to, again, help promote the usage of those services. The district also wanted to look at a paid midterm disability plan. Essentially what that does is it bridges between short-term disability and long-term disability, so that's also up for consideration. And then the other item that we talked a little bit about is the possibility of adding maybe a fourth plan option with a higher deductible. Part of what school districts are struggling with is the cost of coverage for families, and so this would potentially give an option for a lower cost premium with a higher out-of-pocket expense should services be needed. And we mathematically have calculated that plan would be approximately 14.5% less costly of a plan than your current high deductible plan of $2,700. These items are being considered still by the district, and I believe the decision's being brought back in April via the CFO and so forth. And then the final thing that I'll mention is that Kairos actually did an evaluation over the last probably 6 to 9 months with respect to a pharmacy benefit manager change. I'm sure most of you have seen in the news and articles, pharmacy benefit managers, it's a very opaque and complicated piece of the healthcare puzzle. And so we wanted to stay, vigilant in terms of being ahead of that, but they essentially are the ones that process the prescription claims when you hand off your prescription at the pharmacy. We did engage a consultant to help us do that analysis because the industry is so complex and hidden with lots of different things. And our goals really were to identify a transparent and financially beneficial contract on behalf of our clients. Also look at strategies for more innovation on clinical and technological solutions for plan participants. So things like how to better manage specialty drugs and so forth. And then finally, just a best-in-class service vendor. We want to make sure that members are navigating the complexity of healthcare as simplistically as possible and with the best experience possible. And then finally, I will just mention, these are more of our soft recommendations. Again, just tying back to some of the information that we saw in the data. I do think there's an opportunity more from a communication and engagement perspective to target women's health. We know that we have a high female prevalence, so to focus on some of the preventative screenings and things of that nature. Also look to increase biometric screenings as well as primary care physician engagement. Look at ways to promote the Blue Care Anywhere, which again is that telehealth visit service. And then finally, encourage some of the tools that they have, that employees have available to them via our insurance carriers so that they can do things like shop procedures and better understand kind of what resources they have available to them. With that, I will entertain any questions.
Okay, Board Member Greenberg, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. First of all, I'd like to apologize to my colleagues and to the presenters. I did not do a good job of getting questions in before this. So if I ask a question and you don't have the answer right now, just say that. I don't need conjecture. I'll get them later. So I apologize beforehand. That is my fault. I should have done a better job there. Concerning the PPO and the creation of a new low-cost plan, it seems to me, is that 6% renewal fee projected now, and I assume it'll probably be closer to 8 or 9%, if not higher. Is that going to be applied across the board to all plans equally?
That is currently what we're evaluating. I'm going to look at Jeff and see if he wants to add anything. I think that's ultimately a decision.
Right, so it's not evaluated yet whether that's 6% to the PPO, 6% only because the PPO is, okay.
Correct.
That's fine. So the pharmacy benefit manager, is that currently done through Kairos, or is that a separate entity currently? Just because I didn't see pharmacy costs broken down in here. Are the pharmacy costs, you said earlier that they were included in these figures.
That
what
is
are they,
correct.
about 35%? Or
Usually it's about 20%. 18 to
20.
20% of your expenditure and claims is for pharmacy. The remainder is medical.
Okay. For the plans, I see an emphasis in, sorry, let me scroll through this very quickly.
Sorry, I can go back to
The increase of biometric screenings and increase of preventative health usage. I'm not super keen on reliance on increasing biometric screenings. I think if we wanted to move, we probably wanted to push primary healthcare providers, only because if we do have that big chunk of the population that might have certain chronic things or might develop them, they might not know about that yet. So if we do, I think the recommendations are actually very good in that sense, that heavy on education especially for the PPO plan. It might be that there are people choosing the PPO plan who should not be in there, and that by providing those tools and resources to families and explaining into our staff, explaining the benefits and the costs. More education on that front might be beneficial in that sense. Okay, I'll stop for now. Just because it occurs to me now that this maybe the questions I have might be quite premature, so there might not be a need for me to ask them all here.
The plan that the district has, just to follow up on Mr. Greenberg's comment, is we will be back to you with the status of the trust in general, the district's trust that provides the contributions to not only this plan, but workers' comp and property casualty, et cetera. And those recommendations then contained within that will also be furnished to you as it relates to the individual plans that you've seen up here. And some of it will be enhancements. All of the enhancements, quite frankly, that we're going to be recommending to you will come as no cost to the employee. It will come from trust assets, and including the life insurance, that's likely. And we now have an employee participation amount out of the pocket to select any one of the three plans. So we intend to take probably the two high deductible plans and make those at no cost to the employee if they select that, to move them more away from the PPO plan. You saw the loss ratio toward the high deductible plans. That's an incentive for them to go over there because they will not have any out of pocket. So you'll see those kinds of recommendations coming forward to you in the next month and a half, something like that.
Okay, Board Member Beckham.
Thank you. Let's see. You said there was a need to reduce the 28% ER visits to other caregivers to reduce costs, correct?
Correct.
And part of the way I just heard, and part of that is to increase the engagement with primary care? Or was it, oh no, it was the telepathy.
Telehealth,
is that,
yes.
What's it called?
Telehealth,
Okay.
yes.
And now I'm skipping because I went to that next slide. In that next slide, you said to help promote the reduce in ER, you're going to reduce that copay. You didn't provide us what that cost would be, but you provided us the cost of the life insurance. Do you have the cost for reducing that copay by $49?
Great question. Today, the actual cost of the consultation, again, is $49. The members on the PPO plan are paying the full cost of that at $49. And so to date, we've only had 17 visits for the telehealth, which equates to about $833. What I can tell you is that the projected savings by moving that 28% to a lower intent setting is an actual savings of over $100,000. And so while it might cost the district a little bit more to push individuals to that telehealth option, it overrides the savings that you would see from the emergency room utilization.
And so that would be an actual cost. So every time somebody uses it, it would just become an actual. So you're not budgeting in like you did for the life insurance and saying, okay, it's going to cost you $70,000.
Correct.
This is something you kind of just got to wait and see what happens that first year and see if you could move that needle. And then you're going to do a risk analysis or, how much you actually ended up spending and how much you believe you saved.
Correct.
And comparing that to make sure if that year you happen to have a benefit versus not a benefit.
I would say that's
go for it.
correct.
Okay, so that's the analysis you were doing there. The stop loss was not used for that one claimant for the 1.6 million, so there must have been some exemption. What are the exemptions in that stop loss, since it didn't stop at 300 and then
It did.
It did stop at 300.
It did.
It did.
The rest of it is carrier paid.
Correct.
Is what?
The rest is carrier
Carrier
paid. So essentially, Scottsdale paid the first $300,000 of that claim, and then the stop loss carrier reimburses the district the difference. So approximately,
Oh, so we weren't out those funds, so that 1.6 million wasn't part of the expenses?
$300,000
Just
would
the
be.
300,000 of then 6 claims?
Correct.
Okay, but 6 claims, because I remember from last year, we've had such a stellar record or great health care that this all of a sudden, we budgeted then, we're probably very we budgeted based upon the past, and then we were just hit with 6 claims. Is that what you're saying? 6 claims doesn't seem like a lot to me, and we have a stop loss. So I'm still a little confused at how we didn't budget for the claims. And we came up with a deficit for the year.
Are you?
Does that make sense?
I'll talk because I spoke to you last year about this. With a population the size of Scottsdale's, we do anticipate some shock claims. And we
Right,
do
you
anticipate
should.
several of them that will go above 300,000, and you've had a history of that happening.
But they
In
were
fact, the
minimal.
$1.6 million claimant has hit you guys for
300.
well above 300,000 for several years in a row, right? So we're expecting that. So when we budget, when we project those claims that Jeremy talked about, we look at all your overall claims experience and we trend that forward given the medical trend. So a $100,000 claim today is going to cost $108,000 next year.
Right.
Right? So we budget that going forward. Because you're self-insured and it's not a guaranteed cost, if you do have a higher prevalence of large claims or even a higher prevalence of a bunch of small claims that add up, that number is going to go up or down from what we budgeted because you're on the hook for the first 300,000 of each and every claim. That's why when Jeremy said, you know, we're $146,000 deficit in our world, that's fantastic. That's great budgeting. That's
Okay.
right on line with what we'd expect. You know, if you get to a 15% deviation from what you expected, that's where you start to go, okay, something's out of whack here. So we thought your claims came in right at what we thought they were going to come in at. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then one other point I'd like to make, that although that stop loss carrier is picking up the 1.3 million above the $300,000, they're charging you a premium for that last year, and then this year they say, well,
Right.
we had bad loss experience for Scottsdale Unified School District. The stop loss insurance premium that we want to charge us next year is going to be higher. It's automatically going to be higher because of the industry, the way it works. It's a term called leverage trend, but we're expecting a stop loss renewal for you guys to increase next year more than it typically would because of those shock claims, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense.
Okay.
So really, when I saw the 1.6, I thought we paid that. That's were the questions.
That's
So
why you
it's
buy
just-
stop loss insurance.
Correct. So-
Because you would
but
be
if they
$1.3 million
pulled that
more
one
in
out of
deficit.
the Others, I was assuming that we paid it.
No, yeah, I'm sorry, no.
No.
Okay.
That's just to give you an idea, one claimant, one person could cost this plan $1.6 million if you didn't buy stop loss insurance.
Okay, that's what I thought, so.
Can I add just one quick thing? One little thing that maybe comfort people. We actually paid premiums of $503,000 in stop loss premiums, but we recovered approximately $1.4 million. So we actually received a lot more than what we paid in premiums last fiscal year. Just as a little.
As protection. And that would be reflected, to John's point, in the renewal that we get from the stop loss carrier.
Can you go back to the slide of this, where you have the 6,000?
Yes.
Can you, just because I think that this is something that it doesn't come easily to everybody, can you explain that $6,000 again?
Sure. So the $6,000 is essentially the contribution amount that the district provides to each participating employee of the district, of the plan. And it comes in the way of premium offset, generally speaking. So for example, if the premium is, oh gosh, and I'm not the math wizard up here, so I'll get my friends to help me, but if the premium is, let's say, well, Jeremy, help me out, math? No.
Because that's the annual number.
That's the annual number, right. So if the cost,
If the cost is 7,000 and the district will pay 6,000 and the member will pay 1,000.
correct, yes. And then,
It just happens for the high deductible, you happen to give 900 of that into an HSA.
correct. So it is equitable across the board, yes, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Greenberg?
For that specific stop loss, I really have two questions here. For that specific stop loss, just given this, I mean, is there kind of an estimate, like, is it going to be about 360, 400? Or have we done an analysis of if we raised it to 500? I guess I'm not asking for the result because, again, it's being analyzed.
Yep.
But is that one of the things being analyzed is if we raised it above whatever that renewal will be to say 500,000 with the savings in the premium, even matter? I mean, given that we have such high claims, I assume not, but, would there be savings there? Is that something being looked at?
It's very fair to say that if you increase your deductible, the amount that you're responsible for, your premiums will drop.
Right.
Whether or not that makes financial
Still
sense,
stays.
whether or not the premium credit is going to match the expected claims between 300 and 500
Right.
is something we will analyze with the school district to make sure, and then the school district can make a decision on what that level is, what that attachment point is.
I
That's
might,
fine.
I might also add that we've asked and received from the trust a quote on adding aggregate stop loss. What we have here is a specific stop loss on a per claims basis of 300,000. An aggregate is total claims for the year, and if you hit the aggregate, then every claim dollar past the aggregate is paid by the carrier. That's the umbrella protection. And for that, you pay a premium, and you have to decide if the differential that I have to pay is worth them coming in. In this particular case, the quote was at 22 million. After that, we will pay every dollar of claims that you have. So if you're concerned about the overall total claims that you would pay for the year because you're having some poor experience, then you would tend to want to look at buying the aggregate. And I think the premium was $35,000 is the annual premium for the aggregate. It might turn out to be worth it. That's one of the things we're looking
Right.
at now.
That's fine. Okay. And then I guess my second question is more broad for Kairos generally. Are there any expected changes for Kairos in how it's run with us or how it's run with other districts or generally in the next 3 to 5 years? I see that you're looking at perhaps getting a new PBM. And are there any other changes we should be maybe aware of or on the horizon?
Sure. We're taking baby steps, I will tell you. I think it's important to note that the vision of Kairos is to do a statewide health insurance pool for the public employees. So all the school districts and the cities and towns and everybody coming together. We think we get joint purchasing power with that, and we get better transparency for our members. We're member-owned, so we are owned by school districts and cities and fire districts. Any public entity in the state is qualified. But in our program, we have two models. One is a shared risk program where those are typically the smaller members that just pay their premium, and if their claims go above that year amount, they have a fixed premium, and that's spread amongst a bunch of school districts. Scottsdale has made the decision to say, we'll be on our own, we're large enough, how we go, everybody will go. But collectively, we're doing things for all of them. So when we make a pharmacy benefit manager change that will take effect July 1, will there be some disruption for the employees? Yes. Will it be slight? In our world, it'll be slight because we have control over that formulary. But the amount of transparency that comes with that and no middlemen, you've seen it in the news. You saw what the proposed legislation to eliminate those middlemen and give rebates back to employees. That's our mission. That's our goal. And we're trying to get those rebates to come back and not be held to middlemen.
So are those rebates, when we get those rebates, are they automatically applied to the administrative costs?
No, those rebates will come back to you starting July
Okay.
1. Those rebates will come back to the members based on the actual rebates of Scottsdale's utilization.
Great, thank you.
And that's just a start, right? We're 3 years into this, and I know you weren't here last year, but we have a real strong vision for Kairos, and because we're owned by school districts and other public entities, we have no motivation other than to do what's right for you and your employees, and that's our drive.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Board Member Kravitz?
Oh, thank you. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Where you show one claimant had 1.6 million in claim expense, that reflects the negotiated Blue Cross Blue Shield
Correct.
prices with the whatever the health entity was.
Right, the in-network, and I will tell you that particular claimant was an out-of-state claimant, and it was good that we had the Blue Cross Blue Shield network nationwide, because if that was out of network, that cost would have been a lot more.
Oh, okay. And then my next question on the financial summary of 2017-2018, it shows an account balance of 3.8 million, correct?
That's correct.
So at the end of the period, that money is invested back in the trust?
That's your money.
Yeah.
And we keep we keep 1/12 of your annual budgeted premium because we want to make sure we're not floating you guys effectively. Any excess money is your call. You guys can take that at any time. It's invested, all investment income is earned specifically for Scottsdale School District. So, and that's invested according to Title 35, public investing.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Board Member Beckham.
Since you brought it up, my memory's not that great after a year. That investment, it's housed with you, isn't it? Don't you have another entity or something, or is it the same entity with?
No, it's within
Ashton
Kairos. It's
Tiffany?
called the
Oh.
Kairos Investment Pool.
Okay.
And so it's a separate account.
Okay, and so we'll be receiving in April an update on how that
We
investment
will,
account's doing?
and the majority of any surplus funds will come back to our trust for
Sure.
investment, rather than remain with Kairos, I can tell you that. So you will see only the amount that Kairos requires the district to maintain with them as being a balance with Kairos. The rest will be back into our investment pool that we have with Wells Fargo.
Okay, and so, but we will see.
And you'll get an update on that in April.
On that and how that investment's
Yeah.
doing and the kind of, okay, thank you. Oh, with that, and this is, since it's just along those lines, I'm going to be talking to Mr. Gadd because it's the district, because this doesn't involve you. But you had mentioned in April you're bringing back, and we're aware, the trust for workers' comp and whatnot. But I just want to make sure that we keep the medical separate so that we look at them, but they're two separate entities and we need to continue. to look at
Inside
them
the
that way.
trust, there's segregation between medical, workers' comp, and property casualty. So while they're in the same trust, they're segregated in terms of the contributions, the premium, the balances, the expenses. So you can see each one separately, and we will track them that way.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay.
I'd like to
Oh,
make a comment
Dr.
if I could. First of all, thank you, Kairos, for your presentation, your good work for us all year long. Appreciate that very much. And I would like to let employees know that, Mr. Gadd said, we'd be bringing back how we're dealing with medical expenses increase with the salary packages and so forth, that we'll bring all of that back. Our intent is to bring back a picture that is favorable to all employees and not hold them at harm for the increase in medical expenses. So there'll be more information on that as we come forward, but I would say don't fret. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we move now to public comment. Sandra, do I have all the cards? Or the card? Okay.
Good job.
In conformance with open meeting laws, the governing board may not discuss or take action tonight on any matters raised during public comments that are not on the agenda. However, the governing board may respond to direct criticism, ask staff to review the matter, or ask that it be placed on a future agenda. As a reminder, each speaker will have 3 minutes. Our screen will indicate the time, the 30-second warning from Vice President Beckham. Please be prepared to close your comments and relinquish the floor at the conclusion of your time. We do ask that each speaker introduce themselves for clarity in the records, and we thank you for your time and attendance here tonight and your cooperation following the meeting protocols. All right, and our first speaker is Stuart Roden.
There we go. Hi, good evening, board members and Dr. Kriegard. I'm Stuart Roden, and I'm a member of the City of Scottsdale Human Relations Commission, which works to promote mutual respect and understanding. We are 7 resident volunteers appointed by the City Council and supported by the City's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Last year, the Commission launched a community campaign called Scottsdale for All. The message is simple. Scottsdale is a place for all people. By all and diversity, we don't just mean race or color. We mean anything that makes us who we are: religion, age, ability, sexual orientation, political views, worldviews, etc. The campaign has 2 facets. The first is a physical poster. Here. Vanna White. There. You can see them in storefronts in Old Town, and they're available at the city's libraries, community centers, firehouses, and police stations. The tagline on the posters names the values of kindness, civility, empathy, and respect. These are the tenets of the Golden Rule. Mayor Jim Lane declared Scottsdale a Golden Rule City in 2017. These values are foundational teachings for our children. The second aspect of the campaign is online. There's Scottsdale for All Facebook page that is an interactive space for civil dialogue. People can share their stories, learn about others, and post a lot of content, photos, videos, events, and more. The Human Relations Commission would love to collaborate with SUSD on ways to get these posters into all Scottsdale public schools. What a great way to make all children feel included and loved, and to convey to them the positive values of our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here are the posters.
Okay, we are moving along now to the consent agenda. Agenda item 8. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Board Member Perleberg moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz makes the second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. All righty. Okay, now we're moving on. Just a moment. Yep, we are moving on now to agenda item 9, action items. Do I have a motion to approve? No, okay, hold on, one moment.
Start with the approval of math adoption.
Yes, I know, I'm sorry. We have a lot going on tonight. Okay. Okay, first is 7A. Do I have, do I have a motion to approve the math adoption for implementation in the 2019-2020 school year? Where are we?
We might want the presentation.
The presentation. The presentation.
Do we-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start over. Okay, we're going to move on now to action item 9, A, approval of the math adoption for implementation in the 2019-2020 school year.
Ask if there's any discussion.
Do I have any discussion? No, okay.
No, I do. I thought Sandy had. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, Board Member Beckham.
Yes. Thank you. I would like to add for the record that the sources of funds that will be paying for the $2 million the $2 million is coming from the 2018-19 budget, and then the $500,000 is coming from the 2019-2020 budget. And am I correct? It's the district assisted funds? Which fund is it? Okay, so it's the DAA. And I just want to have that noted so that it's.
It's on the agenda.
Okay.
It's on the agenda?
It's on the agenda item under funding.
Under fund.
Under background? So it's from up?
It says funding.
Right, but I want it noted that it's coming from two different budgets, two different budget years, so that it is noted as I had stated it.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay.
If I may, before the vote,
Okay,
I
Dr. Creekard?
would like to formally thank Mrs. Redner, Dr. Nance, their 80-member committee, some of whom are here. And so before the vote, anybody who is on the Math Adoption Committee, if you please stand and be recognized, and thank you for your hard work. They worked for almost a year, 80 members of them, and came to wonderful conclusion for a very important curriculum piece in our schools, and we thank them for their effort, their dedication, and their perseverance through it all. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Creekard. Okay, now, do I have a motion to approve the math adoption for implementation in the 2019-2020 school year?
So moved.
Board Member Kravitz moves. Do I have a second?
I'll sec. Go ahead. Board Member Beck.
Board Member Beckham seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes with a vote of 5-0. All right, moving along now to action item 9B, approval of authorization for additional expenditures for the restoration of Navajo Elementary School. Do I have any discussion?
I think is Mr. Railer coming up?
Would you like him to? Mr. Railer, if you wouldn't mind coming up, just in case there are questions that are more difficult than I could answer. Okay, ask for questions.
Okay, do I have any questions for Mr. Railer? Board Member Beckham.
Thank you. I would just want to make sure that I have this correct, because I want to make it for the record again. I don't like making an approval without knowing the exact dollar amounts and where the funding's coming from. So in the recommendation, there is not a dollar amount given. So what is the dollar amount that you are requesting authorization for?
I'm sorry, I'll need to log in real quick. Did you all get the updated school rebuilds smart sheet last night, late, 11:30 or so?
I did, and that's why I want to make sure it's on record of what exactly we're going to be voting for. So if we can just, maybe for the record, after you discuss it, we could attach it.
So I did give you some specifics in last night's handout, if you will. I'm sorry. So on November 7th, we went through that memo, and it was pretty general. And so I've gone through all of the work, and I've added one line as a reserve line at 1.5 million, just in case we run into something that we don't know. We got some good news today. They had put a camera down all of the sewers, and generally speaking, the sewers are in pretty good shape. So that's a real plus for a school that's as old as it is. So this outlines all of the work that we've estimated at this point, and so we're looking at $4,257,000 as a baseline. And if we have to come back for anything else, although I've added that 1.5 as an unforeseen placeholder, we feel that we're in pretty good shape there. So your dollar amount that you're looking for is $4,257,000. Yeah, and that's the and then you have the listing there of all of the different components of that
Not to
improvement.
exceed how much did we just say?
It's and so the something that was mentioned, I believe, on Thursday was that one of the costs that we don't have, because it hasn't been determined completely, is windows. So windows would be part of that 1.3 million.
Correct, the 1.5.
$5 million
Yep.
allowance. Okay.
Yes.
And we don't foresee a design professional soft costs, because that
Well,
wasn't
it's
included in
actually
the
in there
ask. So I wanted to.
in the over-under on the, for the total project. So we don't know what it is because the trust is having to pay for a good portion of that. So we haven't gotten their complete number for design, mostly because we don't have all of this approved and ready for them to go. So we could come back with a number for the designers, but right now they're only designing the work that's associated with the trust and the fire.
Okay. Right, because if it was over 100,000, you would have to come back. So I
Correct.
just want to make sure, because
Correct.
if you're thinking we're going to spend it, we might as well include it
Right.
in here
Well,
now
and-
in this ask.
And the other thing is that we're not going to pay the architect directly. The
Trust.
insurance has a clause in their contract with us that they will pay for it and then we pay them back. So it's not like a typical procurement where we would go and find the vendor and go through that process. The trust already has them under contract, so we would pay the trust. But any expenditure over 100,000, we would bring back to the board to talk about.
Okay, but in this case, if it's within that $1.5 million range, we could pay that architect within that allowance also.
That's correct.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that we had the dollar amount. We know that it is, and then also for the record, that the funds, the source of funds is going to be the bond, which is the 620 account, correct? And just to make sure that everybody on the board in their approval understand that there's a $1.5 million kind of allowance out there within this number. Okay.
Any
Thank you.
further questions? Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Okay. Do I have the motion to approve the authorization for additional expenditures for the restoration of Navajo Elementary School not to exceed $4.257 million? Oh,
It just dawned on me when you decided to go straight there.
we have another question, Dennis. Board Member Beckham.
So when, on Thursday, one of the items that we talked about was capacity. And I pulled up, because you had given us the picture of the classrooms and the facility. When this is all completed, what will the capacity be of the school? I
So-
guess square footage, and then how many classrooms for how many students?
So capacity's a moving target depending on which resource you want to look at.
I'm just looking straight at facility and square footage, I guess, with how the rooms are set up.
Well, I guess that depends how many kids you put in a room.
So we, on
Quite honestly.
average, we put in, like, take what we did for Hopi.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of the room and what the current use is to come up with a total. That's how you do a real capacity study. The one that SFB has is.
No, I'm not talking about, I'm sorry. I'm just saying, when we get done with spending when we get done with the renovation from the fire, and we are done spending the $5 million, we are going to have X amount of square footage. I'm wondering that number. And then I'm wondering how many classrooms we're going to have. I'll make it simple on that side.
So
And
the
also my
school itself, let me not make a mistake. We were looking at it earlier today, crunching a bunch of numbers.
And I apologize. I thought this was one of the questions that we asked on Thursday that we wanted, so.
Are we altering the footprint?
No.
No,
Yeah.
no, we are not. The square footage doesn't change. Same
So
square
what
footage.
is-
the
what
same
is
Square
it then?
footage.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
asking.
Hang tight just a second. The silence is deafening. Navajo is 78,106. We're not reducing square footage, we're not adding to square footage. And again,
Are we altering, Dennis, the number of classrooms with office remodel or anything like that?
the office remodel is going to take up some space from the tap room and the teacher workroom. Right now, there are 2 full-size classrooms adjacent to, across the hall from the front office, and we'll be taking up a little bit of space to create a conference room, a couple of offices, and reconfigure the bathrooms to turn them into ADA compliant bathrooms.
So I guess, what was the capacity? What was the capacity before the fire, and that would be the capacity today?
Depends on whose number you use. The district has
Scottsdale
not.
School District put out a number of what the capacity was
Yeah,
before
and
the
that
fire.
was from the School
What would that be?
Facilities Board. We have not calculated, to my knowledge, a specific capacity from a district standpoint. The School Facility Board uses square footage and comes up with a capacity and says that's it, without regard to program. Okay?
So
Classrooms are at Navajo.
that number is 859, Member Beckham. That's what the School Facilities Board feels we can fit as far as students. But remember, on Thursday, I talked about how Scottsdale schools, 4 districts that I've been involved with, Scottsdale Schools seems to have more programs with fewer kids in the classrooms.
Right.
So OTPT programs, reading resource programs, all kinds of things that serve our children that don't necessarily mean 30 kids in a classroom. So when you ask if we've got 42 classrooms at Navajo and what the capacity is, I can't tell you that unless the principals come through and said, okay, we're going to have 3 kids in this classroom because this is the program that we run, and 7 kids in this classroom because this is the program that we run, and K is going to have 21, and 1 is going to have, 23. So I don't have that information. I have the factual information as far as what the School Facilities Board.
Do we know how many classrooms will be available? That's an easy. Does the principal know?
Matt.
How many
give me a solid.
classrooms?
What do you got? Number of classrooms
At Navajo?
in your building?
About 40.
40? Okay.
Estimation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have any further questions for Mr. Rayler? Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Okay.
Okay, here we are again. Do I have a motion to approve the authorization for additional expenditures to restore Navajo Elementary School not to exceed $4.25 million? I have a motion.
So moved.
Board Member Greenberg makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 4-1.
No, you have to
Oh.
ask about, because I'm abstaining.
Okay, are you abstaining?
I'm abstaining.
Board Member
Just-
Beckham abstains.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Again. To agenda item 9C, the approval of purchase of pupil transportation school buses. Do I have any questions on the purchase of pupil transportation school buses? Okay. No questions? All right. Do I have a motion to approve the purchase of pupil transportation school buses? So moved. Board Member Beckham makes the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Board Member Perleberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. All right. We can go to executive session. Okay. Moving now to agenda item 9D, approval of contract with Dr. John Creekard for the position of Superintendent of Scottsdale Unified School District. I make a motion that we move to executive session for legal advice.
I'll second.
Board Member Perleberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Regular meeting at 7:11 p.m. And we move on to action item 9D. And I move that we approve the contract on the terms discussed during the executive session and direct the general counsel to revise the agreement in accordance with those terms for the contract with Dr. John Creekard as superintendent of Scottsdale Unified School District for the 2019-2020 school year. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Board Member Kravitz, Greenberg, and Perleberg.
I didn't say.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Okay, moving on to agenda item 10, future items. Do any board members have any future items?
We have plenty. We have plenty.
None? Okay, no future items. All right. Moving on to agenda item 11, dates of upcoming meetings. And we have a special meeting on Tuesday, February 26th at 5 p.m. at the NBA. We have a special meeting on Thursday, March 7th at 3 p.m. at the NBA. And we have a regular meeting on Tuesday, March 19th at 5 p.m. at Coronado High School in the boardroom. Okay, do I have any, agenda item 12, do I have any governing board reports? Nope, no reports? All right, then we're getting to agenda item 13, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved. I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned.
Feel better.
13.